Hello and welcome to Tomlin's Harmonica podcast, where I'll be hanging out with players and teachers and having conversations loosely based around harmonica. Over the past 30 years, this week's guest has pushed the harmonica to new technical heights, while still staying true to the blues tradition. He's a technical wizard who's won too many awards to list, plus he's a fantastic and thoughtful teacher. He is Carlos del Junco. Welcome to the podcast, Carlos. How are you doing?
Hey, Tomlin. I'm doing great. Thanks for doing this.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. So for people who don't know where you are, whereabouts are you based?
Well, right now, since about 2007, I've been in this little town of Port Hope, Ontario. It's a really pretty little town, just 100 kilometers east of Toronto on Lake Ontario. So, yeah, in Canada. Yeah.
Fantastic. And because this is very specific to an era of the world, what's it like currently with COVID and lockdown and things like that?
Oh yeah, no, I mean this town definitely picks up in the summertime with some tours, and we've got a really beautiful little river where there's a salmon run a couple times a year, trout and salmon. And so it's a bit of a tourist destination. They've been closing the beach on weekends because of that, but otherwise things are, there hasn't been any. We've just gone into what we call stage 3, which is opening up, where I'm playing my first outdoor concert this coming Saturday, up to 100 people allowed to watch, properly socially distanced, in a field, in a farmer's field. And yeah, and restaurants just opened up in our town, like in our rural, but in Toronto, which is a big urban center, they haven't gone into this new stage 3 with letting out indoor restaurants open and stuff.
Okay, so it's kind of different from city to town to.
Yeah, if it's a big urban center, yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, we're kind of similar. We've just started opening some stuff up, but no gigs. Still, there's no public performances. So I'm very envious that you get to go and play this weekend.
I'm super excited. Yeah. So
that's awesome. So was COVID, was lockdown an opportunity to work on things that you didn't have time to work on before, or?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I've been procrastinating not procrastinating. Ronnie Shellist has been doing webinars for years and years, and I know you interviewed him. And so I actually bugged him quite a bit, talking to him and emailing, and he helped me get started on, how to set things up for the webinar platform and doing the Zoom thing and all that. So now I've done 3 with good success. And yeah, I'm looking forward to doing my next one in August. I'm just doing like 1 a month for now. That's enough.
That's very cool. And they've been going well and well attended.
Yeah. The next one actually is August the 15th. And we're going to be looking at a piece by David Burgin, a solo. And so he's going to be coming on as a guest. And we're going to talk about, his life as a player when he was really playing full time. And, the one record that he recorded, Wild Child, there's just some amazing, like some of the best harmonica playing I've ever heard. Like he was a huge influence on me, just that one record and some of the other stuff he did as a sideman with other musicians, really fantastic musicians. He made such an impression on me. I'm going off on a tangent here, but,
no, that's cool.
Like, for lack of a better word, progressive players who aren't regurgitating stock Little Walter and Sonny Boy Williamson licks, guys like Burgin, David Burgin, and Paul DeLay immediately come to mind, who still have a really, rooted in blues, but doing something a bit different. And so so I'm really psyched to be getting into that.
That's very David. Cool. Well, look, you'll hear that I'm typing. I'm making notes of things for people who are listening to click links below the podcast when they're listening to check out the webinar, because this will go out before then. So hopefully some people will.
Let me know. That. Yeah, let me know how much time I have, because I haven't got the link up yet. So I thought about that. And I thought, do I need to get the link up? But of course, you're not going to get this posted for a while. So
no, I'll let you know after we finish recording. I'll let you know what the the date will be. And yeah, I definitely want to talk about some of your influences, but I maybe want to go back a little bit and kind of get a little bit of the origin story, because you don't have the most Canadian name, and I read that you were born in Cuba, and what's the story of your early life?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, I mean, my parents were the condensed story, mostly Cuban. There was a mix there, but I was born just pre-Castro in '58, and so my father saw what was going on, so we left the country. Right, they'd already been out of the country and stuff, and traveled around. They'd actually lived in Canada for a while before that. Anyway, so we came back to Canada, and I've been in Canada since year one, basically, since I was 1 year old. And so we got out before Castro put a lid on things. He'd actually come into power in January '59, and we left like right after that, just before he put a lid on things,
Wow. And have you been back since he died?
Yeah, I mean, just once for like a vacation, just to take in the culture, and that was 1991.
Okay.
There was just to take in the jazz festival was happening annual in Havana, so I went to watch some of the music there, and hang out on the beach a bit and take some tours, and yeah.
Very cool. And did you come from a musical family? Did you grow up listening to great music that got you into playing, or?
No, that's a good question. I mean, my dad wasn't really music at all. He was visual, so I think I got the best of both. My mom was musical. My dad was an architect, and I got into drawing. I was the only one that I was like visually inclined as a kid, and then I ended up going to art school for 4 years. My mother played classical like a piano, and she took up the flute after I was born. In fact, I have a vivid memory, one of my first memories hanging out. I was the youngest of 6 kids, so to answer your question again, yes, they were bringing home up to 10 years old, or my oldest, so 5 other siblings, bringing home the latest Beatles and Rolling Stone records, and then my next 2 eldest brothers were bringing home some blues records as well, so that had a big influence. But I remember sitting on the floor when my mother was practicing, and she'd be playing some riff, like reading sheet music, and working on this thing again and again and again. And then I remember once going, "Oh, I think you got that one. You got, But I'm sure it had subliminally this huge impression on me, about practice and good practice, like, repeating. Because, I'll sit there for a long time and work on something until I can get it, slowly and diligently. And that's something I really talk about with my students about, that's a big component of my teaching, is just how to practice well. And, of course, there's oodles of technique on the harmonica. But anyway.
That's the biggest thing that I think is really difficult for people who haven't grown up either learning an instrument or seeing people learn an instrument. They don't really appreciate what practice looks like and what good practice looks like. And so that, they maybe play it once or twice and hit it once or twice and think, okay, I've achieved this, and then move on. But that's when the drilling starts, isn't it? Exactly.
Yeah. Once you finally got the riff right, then you got to make it so that you don't have to think about it, Yeah.
I actually just did a podcast that came out this week with a composer friend of mine, and it was just a glorified rant about practice, which was very cathartic for both of us.
Yeah.
So you started harmonica. I read that you started at 14. What kind of why did you pick a harmonica?
Oh, I mean, in a nutshell, a friend of mine he played guitar, and with a neck brace, he wore a harmonica, and just the sound of him bending a note, I think it was just that visceral sound. I was like, I got to make that sound. And, basically I went out and bought one and started, listening to records, and then started taking some lessons locally. Supertramp, that opening track on School Days, I think, from their very first record, and then I was listening to Paul Butterfield. I mean, that was my biggest influence in the early days was Paul Butterfield. Then I was buying every harmonica record I could get my hands on from Little Walters and Sonny Boys. But I funnily enough, I was drawn to the more, again, people that weren't just into blues and music. I was listening to all different kinds of music. So Lee Oskar was a big influence, but at the same time, I was listening to blues rock and, jazz rock, in the 70s as a teenager, jazz fusion, prog rock, you name it. And I think it sort of carried over into the stuff that I play. Well, while my heart is still, my heart and soul is still, I love the instrument as a blues voice. I've always been intrigued at sort of the other possibilities of stuff you can do. Hence, my records end up being pretty eclectic.
Yeah, that was something I was trying to pin down is whether, well, I want to know how you describe yourself. Would you think of yourself more as a bluesy jazz player or a jazzy blues player?
Well, a bit of both, again.
You're not allowed a bit of both.
Yeah, like my first love is still absolutely blues. For me, and it's so subjective, because I hear a lot of young overblow players who are really, I got to play with overblows. And they're doing all this sort of really cool technical stuff. There's a lot of technique on the harmonica, but if you don't have that foundation of, first of all, a good tone, good sense of phrasing and groove, the diatonic harmonica, it's a roots country folk blues instrument. And, again, subjectively, this is just me. The voice that it has and the fact that you can make all these fantastic, just that sound is just so visceral, and you can't get that same kind of bending sound in a chromatic harmonica. But the point is, again, I hear a lot of young players who are into overblows, but they just skipped all that blues foundation. And again, I keep repeating myself, the whole subjective thing. But that's me, that's how I hear things.
Do you think that's maybe just a young musician thing, full stop? There's the desire to be very technically advanced, because I see that in guitar and piano and drums, and maybe the kind of musicality comes later for a lot of people.
That's a loaded and big question, and I'm not sure if I'm really equipped to answer that, because I think, there is some weird, mysterious thing about how everyone hears music. Period. Mm-hmm. And so, I read a good book about a jazz piano player called Kenny Werner called Effortless Mastery. Just because, again, I'm intrigued all about all things practice, and there was an interviewer asking him, if you wanted one more thing in your playing, like what would you want? And he said, technique, and you sort of go, what do you mean? Wait a second, technique. But the point is that the player, the personality of the player, no matter who you are, will be expressed. And the more technique you have, the better ability you have to express who you are as a player. So, you can never have enough. Well, there's a balance, but the point is the more technique of working on a specific thing, a riff or a sound or the better able to express who you are.
Absolutely. So this is interesting, because I think a lot of people maybe don't think that someone like you is still thinking about practice. But to me, it sounds like you probably still are very clear about what you're working on currently. What are you practicing? What are you excited about?
I go through phases, and actually the thing is, since I've been doing this webinar stuff, I'm amazed at how much time it takes just to be organized, and being a little bit of a perfectionist. I want to make sure that my webinars are really well prepared, and that's been taking up a lot of time, just the learning curve, and making sure materials are together, PDFs, and so a long-winded way to say that sometimes I don't practice. And then when I do practice, I try to make it count, even if it's just half an hour or an hour here or there. And inevitably, I'm just looking for ways to take things, I'm calling my webinar series Blues, Harmonica Blues, a little outside of the box series. kind of like, like the Paul Delays and the David Burgins. And I like to think that I'm a little bit, I'm outside of the box in what I do in my own playing as a blues voice, So the point is, what I practice, I guess, is just things that are going to, kind of like the little dog listening to the gramophone. One ear is going to go up and go, oh, that was different, And so whatever it is I might practice, it's maybe some little piece of language that might just sort of be a little twist and turn on a turnaround in a cool way. I'm loving the sound of like the flat 5 interval, and how can I use that? It's part of the blues scale or whatever. It's just one interval, but so sometimes I'll just practice descending flat 5 intervals or minor third intervals, and then how can I incorporate them into some piece of blues language, But it's funny that you asked that, because for me it still comes back to applying it to something that's bluesy. Mm-hmm. And I like to think that I'm trying to put something, if I'm playing something jazzy, it still has some element of a blues language in it. And some of my favorite sax players have that quality, the Cannonball Adderleys, even Paul Desmond, who was this beautiful lyrical sort of soft player. I mean, I say soft, he had this very velvety tone. He had a lot of blues in his playing. When his playing, he could play these really simple ideas, but his playing is ridiculous and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And all that stuff influences everything that I do. I read a book about him last summer, and I was just listening to everything he recorded. Of course, you can with streaming services. So that's where my brain goes. Anyway, again, a long-winded answer, but.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, and I like this. Like, it's very obvious that you do pay homage to the tradition of blues, but you are pushing it, and I like that. I think a trained ear can hear all these things that Little Walter wasn't putting in his playing, all the kind of chromaticisms and overblows and kind of filling in and playing a little bit outside, but it's still to someone who listens to blues harmonica and doesn't really know what's happening, it sounds like blues harmonica. You've got a lot of the tone and the feel and that kind of language. And I think that's really cool, because like you said, there are a lot of kind of younger players who are being very technically advanced and pushing and maybe forget what was great about the instrument in the first place.
Yeah, again, this is what's great about the instrument. I'll just play that same riff again and again throughout this interview. But again, that's just my subjective, take on things.
So how did the overblow thing come into your playing? Because that's obviously a big part of what you're known for. How did it start?
I know that I'd stumbled on them accidentally before I'd heard of Howard, and then and the whole thing about setting up harmonicas and stuff. I might have even done some fiddling without even realizing, before meeting Howard. And then, of course, guys like Joe Falisco were there. He was like the first quote unquote customizer to start, making harps play better and doing modifications to make overblows play better. But how did I first get into it? I mean, really, it was just sort of partly a just frustration of I dabbled with the chromatic, and I never really liked the mechanized tone sound. I mean, I've certainly appreciate really great blues playing on the chromatic, or guys like Stevie Wonder who really make a chromatic talk. Whereas a guy like Toots Thielemans, who's like one of the seminal, or whatever you say, the most well-known jazz chromatic harmonica players, I never liked his tone. I just don't like, and when I actually heard him play, a beautiful player that he's playing and all the stuff that he would play, because again, he was a ridiculous, amazing jazz player. But I heard him play diatonic harmonica on a recording, and I realized he could barely bend a note for his life. It was really interesting. And I thought, Stevie Wonder really knows how to play a diatonic. You can hear that in Boogie on Reggae Woman. So that translates into his chromatic playing. A guy like Paul DeLay, who's mainly, a diatonic player, played gorgeous sounding chromatic. He could really make it talk because he understood the nuances of embouchure and putting expression into the notes. Yeah.
But you weren't tempted to kind of put the effort in for chromatic?
No. I think, there's a part of it is just stubbornness, and another part of it is just I love the resistance of the feeling of an overblow. Mm-hmm. I think, I have this analogy about sculpture and, that it's just a different way of creating textures and shapes. But the resistance of the stone when I was carving stone in my early 20s and throughout my 20s, I went to Italy to study stone carving with a grant after high school. And I akin to sort of that resistance of the overblow to the resistance of the stone, mm-hmm. Maybe that's a bit far-fetched, but, that I love that challenge too. And where, overblow is certainly not very stable sounding. I'm not going to use it and try to play in the key of F sharp on a C harmonica or the key of B in a, something that's completely foreign and so far away from the key center. It's just not going to sound very good. But, used judiciously as passing tones and choosing songs that are more or less, sit in a certain key. The diatonic is an amazing instrument.
It's interesting because I totally agree with you. I normally feel like the weirdo in the room who likes that the overblow sounds a little bit different and it pops through. I don't know, that there's something just so wonderful about hitting that 6 overblow and in second position and just hearing it sing, even though it sounds very different to everything else. And I think it's interesting that you like it, and yet overblows get so much disdain in the harmonica world. Why do you think that is?
Well, just for the very reason, Joe Felisko and I had a very deep discussion about, overblows and stuff. And as he points out, it's the most unstable sound. And he's right, that the instrument can produce. So, honestly, my goal, if I'm going to use overblows, I don't want them to sound like overblows. I want them to sound like just as much as possible, as is possible, regular notes. So I don't want them to pop out. I want them. And so I'll practice if there's a certain thing that I might be playing on a certain song. Like a lot of the jazzy stuff I play, I've worked out. I said that in the Neil Warren interview. I don't have the chops, although I'm working on it, to just play and improvise really freely and quote unquote intelligently, on jazz changes. But I do practice that stuff, but not hard enough. And the point is that I want my overblows to sound as at least hopefully close to, a regular note, and use them as passing tones. And that's really it.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You mentioned playing over changes, and that for me is instantly the thing that causes an issue with the diatonic harmonica. I'm a guitarist originally, and so the idea of playing over changes, the instrument is laid out to play over changes, just like a piano is laid out very effectively for that kind of thing. Whereas harmonica is beautifully laid out to play over 1, 4, and 5. But how do you find that you get limited in terms of what types of changes you can play over, or are you working on being able to do anything that gets thrown at you in a jazz standard context?
In a perfect world, I would like to think that I could. I'm not sure if I have the discipline to show up for 3 hours a day, which you would need at least that kind of practice to practice the drills and skills of playing things in all 12 keys. You have to do that if you want to play jazz standards. There's no real way of getting around it. And so I'm sort of partly lazy, partly, I'm not really that interested in playing through a bunch of complex jazz changes. Again, certain tunes like the Jersey Bounce, which I've been playing for years, those kind of jazz standards that don't go too far outside the key changes or the key of the harmonica. I'm willing to tackle those types of tunes because I think they sound good on a diatonic. You can make them sound good.
Cool. And then I wanted to ask you a little bit about the actual the physical element, which is the harmonica. I noticed you use golden melodies, or certainly I've seen you use golden melodies in videos. Are they standard? Are you setting them up still, or is someone setting them up for you? Back
in 95, when I got to study with Howard for a month, I actually went and hung out there for 2 months. I'd already taken 4 week-long classes, sort of master classes with him when he used to teach in Elkins, West Virginia between 88 and 91. And then in 95, I got to study with him. I met Joe Falisco in 95, and he was the first one to help me set up harps and stuff. And so and he taught me a few things. So I do all my own setup and customization, but it's really bare bones, basically a bit of embossing on the reed plates to get the reeds to play louder. And then, I do a compromise gapping of the reed. Any harmonica player that is into overblows knows about reed gapping. And so I set up my harp so that I have to work a little bit harder for my overblows. And that allows me to play a bit louder when I'm just playing a regular blow note up to holes 4, 5, and 6, let's say, right? Those, if you put the gap in too close and you hit a regular hole 4, 5, or 6 really hard, nothing will happen. You know what I'm saying? There'll be no sound. So I at the expense of sometimes missing an overblow, I will set my reeds up so that I have to work a little bit harder for the overblows. It just lets me play a little bit more aggressively. I remember once trying to play one of Howard's harmonicas. This is years ago, so I don't know what his harps are like now, but I think, wow, these are set up so tight. I would never be able to play as aggressively as I'd like to play. So you have to breathe very differently depending on how the reeds are set up. Yeah, that's interesting. Also, there's a bit of your playing that I was going to ask you about, which I think ties in with this, which is the kind of dynamic work in your playing, because I noticed that loads of players don't bother with this, and you do, and it's beautiful, but you vary the volume so much, and your attack, you play a lot with that, and I'm assuming that if you had that really tight gap on those blow reeds, you'd lose a lot of that ability to play with such a wide range of volume. Well, thanks. I think that's one of the things I'm always trying to share with my students is that idea of foundational techniques of working on control of a bent note, and just that thing. Let's say we'll have an A flat harmonica here, but and that idea of leaning into the note with the embouchure but not moving the pitch, that's not an easy thing to do. That's a more advanced bending technique, and that. But I love. What was the question again? I'm sorry. No, I was just about dynamics. About dynamics, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I did a short little video called "Ta-Ta Articulation and Note Dynamics." So again, whether you're playing a single note or a bent note, the embouchure is the embouchure. It's the embouchure, and it takes a while to appreciate the nuances and the subtleties of what you have to do with your mouth to shape a note, and to hold it once you can bend a note, and to play with dynamics. But it's something that, early on every harp player should pay a lot of attention to. And then you can do all those things and play with dynamics. And yeah, I mean, I love that, trying to emulate that Stan Getz or Paul Desmond, you listen to enough of those guys and, that's, on the saxophone reed where you just hear the breath. So I like to think that I can sometimes try to do that in some of my acoustic tunes where I'm playing sort of jazzier stuff.
No,
kind of thing.
It's such an important part of playing, and I think I was chatting to one of my pals about this, another harmonica teacher, and we were saying that basically it's kind of the one thing that can elevate most people's playing instantly is just learning how to play dynamically and knowing the full range of volume they can get out of a hole.
The people listening to this can't see me nodding my head aggressively. Yeah, absolutely, 100% agree. I mean, that's just one of the many things, of course, but absolutely, dynamics and understanding that is pretty foundational.
Cool. So I want to skip a little bit away from just the pure music-y stuff just for a moment, because you did mention that you studied to be a sculptor, and it sounds like you did a little bit of that professionally, and then you switched to becoming a full-time musician. What made that shift?
Well, as I say, I started playing harmonica when I was 14, and I was always, as an early teenager, pursuing drawing, and I was really into art at high school, and then I worked in an architect's office as an office boy. My father was an architect. Before I took a year off between high school and art school, and I realized I didn't want to become an architect. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And then I ended up 4 years at Ontario College of Art and majoring in sculpture, and then worked towards a bursary, which took me to Italy to study the stone carving. And so I was really into it. When I do something, I just tend to really dive into it. And so this was no exception. But I was always playing harmonica at the time, and I was a part of a couple of bands and the duos in art school. And then when I got back from Italy, I spent 9 months there. After a couple of years, I joined a band where we played every weekend. With a sax player, I learned a lot of my chops about learning about playing harmonies, playing with a saxophone player. We had a house gig in this little bar downtown Toronto. So I learned a lot there. And then by the time I was 30, I had a crossroads, didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd sort of more or less given up playing sculpting. Need a place to get dirty and with stone carving, which was sort of what my favorite thing was. I actually went to see a career counselor thinking I'd go to apply some of the credits from art school towards university degree towards becoming an art high school teacher, let's say. And then I signed up for university and 3 courses in 1 year. I thought I'd go part-time and continue playing. I was also working part-time as a poster framer for my art high school teacher quit teaching and opened up the shop. He was a really cool guy, very smart. And I worked from on and off for him for 15 years before I became full-time musician. So 30, I had a crossroads. And basically, that's when I decided I wanted to become a full-time musician. I had kind of an epiphany. I had a chance to work on this play where I was the only musician, and I was playing harmonica for one of the characters in the play. They went on the road, and basically I dropped out of university, and I never looked back. And then continued working part-time until I was 40, less and less, and then sort of jumped in full-time as a musician. I didn't start singing until I was 30 because I realized, okay, if I want to have my own band, I got to start singing. Started taking singing lessons, doing all that stuff.
That's so funny that you mentioned the singing, because that was literally the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, because you are, please don't take this the wrong way, but you're a surprisingly good singer and band leader, because I heard about you a lot before I listened to you, and I've just heard about, fantastic harmonica player, and you got to check out like this technical wizard. And then I watched this gig. I think it was it's probably about 15 years ago that it was televised. I didn't watch it 15 years ago. I watched it earlier. But you're just a phenomenal singer, phenomenal band leader. And
was that by any chance? Was it a full concert by any chance? Was it Cafe Campus?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was like late 90s. That's
Wow.
like 21, 22 years old. Yeah. Well, thanks.
It's killer.
Thanks.
Do you still work on the singing and on that kind of technical side?
Less and less. I took so many different singing lessons with so many different teachers, just as I've done with the harmonica, applying it and taking lessons with saxophone players, guitar players, piano players, just to understand stuff about theory and about how to think about practicing, this riff, that riff. There's always something to be gleaned. But singing, oh my God, it was like, at one point I was really determined to become like a much better singer. But I think I've always, I've sort of stopped caring. And in fact, I because of that, I think I'm just more relaxed. And it's like, okay, this is what my voice can do. All right, that's it. Just sing in that range. Don't try it. I mean, I covered Little Wing, which, I never thought I had in a million that I could sing. But, I do a journeyman's job on it. And it's not, I don't cringe when I listen to it. So that's a good sign,
And yeah, that is actually a great cover you did, Little Wing. I'm going to put that in the show notes for people to listen to. I highly encourage. But yeah, it's I don't know. I feel that harmonica and singing go hand in hand in terms of a lot of the same techniques and getting that breath control foundation and the relaxation. So do you think that they helped each other? Do you think learning to sing helped your harmonica playing and vice versa?
That's an interesting question, because I've always thought like the natural vibrato that you hear on a good singer, I've never, if I may be really relaxed, I just don't do it enough. There is some kind of a natural vibrato, but it's always been a mystery to me. The natural good vibrato of a good singer. It's like, how the heck do you do that? And it's very different than a harmonica vibrato, I think. It's a very volitional, if that's the right word, willful thing that you're doing when you do a harmonica vibrato. And there's, I don't want to get into a big thing about the different types of vibrato, but there's two main types. And singing vibrato, I think, is something that kind of just you let happen. Like most of the singing teachers that I studied with, talked about that stuff, and it's always been a mystery to me.
Yeah. Is it
I'll
something?
leave it at that.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about kind of the picking up the harmonica, and I wanted to chat a little bit about the role of transcription, and obviously you've spent a lot of time transcribing harmonica. You have, you clearly know the language of the greats. But I'm interested in what other instruments really get you excited to transcribe, and what some of those challenges are.
I mean, once I started playing, with overblows and learning, then there was it didn't depend on what the instrument was. Mm-hmm. It was just, I love that melody, and what is he playing? It doesn't matter whether it was a piano, guitar, saxophone, or trumpet, but certainly those would probably be the main instruments that I was learning from. Like, it's not like I tried to learn a hammered dulcimer solo or anything, but the sort of classic blues jazz instruments, which are piano, guitar, sax, trumpet. Those are the first ones that come to my mind. So,
and do you find that there are certain positions that seem to be mechanically laid out better for certain instruments when you're transcribing, or is it more kind of down to the individual song and you and what you're feeling?
No, it's purely down to two things: the melody that's being played and just the vibe of what's being played, and then and the groove and the intonation, the tone of the instrumentalist, and there's going to be different depending on who's playing. Like there was this one, for instance, at one point I was obsessed with this piano player, Eddie Costa, and there's these sessions that were up in this guy's house. He died when he was 31. He was a ridiculous piano player, and there's this session with Tal Farlow. He's a guest with Tal Farlow, and this guy just had a tape recorder running at these late night sessions, and just amazing stuff. And they do Out of Nowhere, and he does this whole solo playing octaves, all octaves on the piano, and it goes on and on. It's like a 7-minute solo, chorus after chorus. And it's so creative and really bluesy in spots. And this kind of his sense of phrasing and a sense of dynamics and a sense of time and just the vibe was just like, oh my God, that's, so that excites me. And so it doesn't matter whether it's a jazz voice or a blues voice. There's got to be something unique about that player that I just go, yeah, I've got to try to put that into my own playing,
And how do you approach kind of more of those chordal instruments? Because that's the big frustration for me as a guitarist and harmonica player. There are so few chords available on the harmonica, and yet, I mean, you do a great job of being an accompanist when someone else is taking a solo. How do you approach that?
Yeah, that's true. You're limited with the chord, so it comes down to placement of notes and rhythm more than anything, and you have to be more select. So here I can play a chord or 2 notes or this interval on this chord change, and other times you're just playing single notes, comping to accentuate something and something interesting rhythmically. But yeah, you just have to be
creative,
judicious in your
So
choices.
When you're playing intervals, do you find that you play splits that aren't octaves? Do you do kind of slightly more interesting splits?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is terribly original or anything, but I mean, if you're playing a blues, that's just, playing cross harp on an A flat harmonica. So there on the 4 chord, I'm playing, 3/5 and 2/4 with just a little split. That sounds cool on the 4 chord, right?
Yeah.
That's something I like to do a lot. And then, of course, the kind of thing, or just, kind of stuff,
That's really cool. I'm just I'm doing the maths in my head. What that 3/5 and 2/4 are. That's cool. I like it.
Well, the 4 chord, of course, on the harmonica, it's just all triads, right? Mm-hmm. So you're just playing, the root in the 5th, or the 3rd and the 3rd and the root, or the 5th and the 3rd.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's all. Yeah, that's it. So.
That's cool, though. It's a little bit more interesting than what you hear generally. It's certainly a hell of a lot more interesting than what I do when we get to the 4 chords. So I will be practicing that.
There you go.
Okay, so another thing that you do that's slightly unorthodox is using pedals in your playing. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you do that?
Sure. I mean, the go-to thing that I've always used forever since I started playing was some kind of delay pedal. Mm-hmm. And then in the last few years, I've gone to the dark side and actually got a pedal board because I was just tired of setting up 3 or 4 pedals on top of my amplifier. So the last 10 years I got into, I know Dennis Grunling likes these things, the Kinder anti-feedback. Okay. It's built into the Harp King amps, but you can buy it as a pedal. Basically, it's built as an anti-feedback, but it does something kind of interesting to the sound and the tone. And I'll use it even with all the knobs in the off. Well, then, as soon as you're plugged into it, you're running through the sound of the pedal, and it has its own sound. So even with all the knobs in the most minus position, mm-hmm. It has its own sound, and I'll use it like that often. And then I also got a Lone Wolf. It's called an Octaver or octave pedal. It's not an Octaver, but it boosts high and low end harmonics. And you only need it on certain amps, but it can really help with certain amps, kind of fatten things up and brighten things up at the same time in a subtle way. And again, I use that in a most minimal, almost with the knob in its the actual effect. Mm-hmm. You can use it as a distortion pedal, but I use it almost in its off position, in its minimal setting. Sorry. And then another thing that Rolly Platt just turned me on to, there's these micro amps. Mxr makes one. Mm-hmm. Actually, Lone Wolf has something called the Harptone Plus, which is similar but not quite the same animal. The advantage of the Harptone Plus pedal is that you can use it to attenuate, in other words, cut the volume of an amp, which is kind of cool. If you have an unruly amp, then it's got a bass and treble. But the Mxr Micro Amp Plus has a bass and a treble as well. And it's just a very clean boost, and it really can help fatten up a sound, either a big amp or a little amp, in different ways. It's really interesting. And so I've been really enjoying that. Those are the main things, but and then because I got a pedal board and I had all this room on the pedal board, I got Empress Effects makes great stuff. So the delay pedal I used for years, I was using a real tape delay until it broke down. Wow. I took it with me on the road until it broke down. For 10 years, I put it underneath the airplane seat in front of me. It was a big, heavy thing. And now I'm using a digital delay by Empress Effects. And the great thing about it is it's got an analog drive-through. So unlike just about every other delay pedal out there, even though they talk about a true bypass, mm-hmm. When it's off, when you engage the pedal, most pedals means that your dry signal is also digitized. It's just like pretty much, unless it's a heavy-duty boutique pedal. And so when this Canadian company, Empress Effects, long-winded answer, but you asked, their first version of their delay pedals was all digital signal through. And now their latest one, called the Echo System, has an analog drive-through. That means the main meat of your sound is still analog. And only the effect is digitized. And that I can hear the difference. Probably the average person in the audience isn't. I can hear the difference. And it sounds great. And it's fully programmable. You can save presets. And it's got tap tempo of all different types of tap tempos. You can create great analog tape delay sweep emulations and stuff. Which, there's certain things that I'll only use once or twice in a night. But it's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And then I have an Mxr Reverb Pedal, which is a really great sounding, similar to the Hall of Fame. I like what it does. And then the Empress Effects, the Reverb, I'm only going to use maybe twice a night. And again, I only got that because I got the pedal board. Mm-hmm. Empress Effects also makes this thing called the Nebulous. It's an all digital through signal, but it's still pretty cool sounding. You can save up to 8 presets, and it does either or and a combination of chorusing, flanging, or phasing. So you can get either subtle chorusing effects, subtle flanging, or a very prominent Leslie speaker effect. And again, I might use that maybe on my set once or twice a night. That's it. And then the last thing is Electro Harmonix Pog, which is a real Octaver. Yeah. You can, and again, I use that maybe once or twice a night because it's kind of a gimmick, mm-hmm. but it's sometimes fun to use when you're playing horn lines or something, yeah. or just, to punctuate one part of a solo. But as soon as you use it more than 2 or 3 times a night, like for a solo, it just sort of sounds very gimmicky to me, mm-hmm. all that stuff. I'm not into compressors and, I think, I want dynamics in my sound.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because you described a lot of stuff that's kind of minimal, and it's mainly going to be you that's going to be hearing it. Obviously, something like the Pog, everyone's going to hear it because that's a very definite effect. Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting, this idea of the things that you need as a player, and I don't just mean you specifically, we all need to make us feel excited and comfortable on stage. And sometimes it can be such a small change that is almost imperceptible to the audience, but it's that one thing that just makes you feel inspired to play. Do you find that has gotten kind of more important to you as your ear gets more and more finely tuned over the years?
No, a good question. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, as I know that I get older, I don't want to be carrying around a big amp. Mm-hmm. So on the other hand, so I'm getting more and more into small amps, and if I could sell most of my big amps, I'll probably will at some point, because I just know I'm not going to want to cart them around. What was the question again?
No, I was just asking about whether your ears have kind of tuned into more and more minutiae in sounds.
Yeah. So thank you. So the Micro Amp Plus pedal by Mxr actually is one of the biggest changes that I've discovered that's helped the minutia of sound, and sort of making things bigger than they really are. It can make a small amp sound even bigger than it really is. It's pretty cool. So it's sort of always there now in my signal chain.
Very, very cool. And then just finally about amps, I'm fairly sure I've spied some of the kind of usual suspects, the kind of Fender Bassman kind of thing. Is that what you generally use?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, that was the first amp I ever had, just one of those reissues. And then eventually I had a point-to-point wired. I don't know if it made a huge difference in terms of the sound. But, I didn't know what I was doing for years and years. And I've never really studied the mechanics of what tube amps do, but I know what I like. My favorite amp right now is this little 5-watt amp. A guy, Nick Capogreco, I think, made them only for a few years. He only made a few of them. It was basically a modified guitar amp, but he built an extra preamp volume control on the back of it, but it's also got mid, treble, and bass. It's almost like a mini Bassman. Like, I can get the thing to sound really snarly, and I've used it on the Blues Etc. CD. I use it in just about all the tracks on that, except for the 2 live tracks. That was a Harp Gear 2 amp, 5-watt with an 8-inch speaker. But yes, the Spirit Harp Pro is the one I was talking about, by Nick Capogreco, which they don't make anymore.
People are going to be trying to track them down now.
Yeah. I actually have 2 of them because I liked it so much. A friend of mine was getting on, and he said, "Yeah, sure, I'll sell it to you." So.
Very cool. Awesome. Well, I'm mindful of taking up too much of your time, and I've really appreciated...
Not at all. I could talk about this stuff all day. Very
cool. Well, hopefully there'll be another opportunity at some point.
All right. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tomlin's Harmonica Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Join me next Monday for the next episode. Happy harping!